Hi, in this episode, we're going to be talking to Özlem Atasever. She facilitates sessions in inherited family trauma and attachment trauma to help you break through repetitive cycles of suffering in your relationships, finances, and other areas of life, and live life more fully. She trained with Mark Wolin, founder and director of the San Francisco Family Constellation Institute, and author of the award-winning book, It Didn't Start With You, in diagnosing and resolving inherited family trauma. Her approach involves both family constellations therapy and somatic attachment therapy. For more information, find in the notes below how to contact Özlem if you like. Enjoy. Hi, Oslin. How are
Hi.
you doing?
Hi, Hilary. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Today we're going to be discussing your story, where you're at now, what you're offering to people around the world. Yeah, so let's just start off with a bit of who you are.
First of all, thank you for having me, Hilary.
Yeah.
It's yeah, always really nice chatting with you. Yeah, so I have been working with people in the area of inherited family trauma and attachment trauma. And this is after my own journey of healing, becoming aware of and healing really inherited family trauma and attachment trauma. So I had for years I had been struggling, as we do in life. I had sort of been struggling financially. And this is after, I mean, when I was in my early 20s, I attended an Ivy League university, and the first couple of years of my career, so to speak, were actually, you'd never suspect that one day I might financially struggle because my dream was to work at intergovernmental organizations, which, like the UN, which materialized. But then after a while, towards my 30s, I began to notice like this financial precariousness because I was always working on fixed term, short term sort of contracts that kept me in financial precariousness. And I was also quite sort of unfulfilled in other areas of my life, sort of my love life, etc. And I would see people in my environment sort of, make progress. They sort of go up the echelon in their careers, fall in love, get married, buy their first home. And nothing was really happening in my life. On the contrary, it got worse and worse up to a point that I could barely afford rent. I found myself even sort of staying with friends for really extended periods of time because I could no longer afford rent, sleeping on the sofa in their living room. And I was, during this time, sort of applying to job after job after job. Now, at this point, I was no longer actually really motivated for any type of corporate or office job. But, you're struggling financially, so that's what you do.
Yeah.
But I'd receive rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection, like what the heck was going on in my life. And there was this still small voice saying, Özlem, you're repeating your father's struggles in life. And I remember here and there sort of having therapy here and there but it never seemed to make any difference. So then one day I stumbled upon an interview with Mark Willin, who is the author of It Didn't Start With You, how I think the exact subtitle was How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to Break the Cycle. And then after watching that interview, I read his book, and then I got in touch with his team. And there was a training, or there is a training that he offers to clinicians in the area of inherited family trauma and attachment trauma. And I decided to do that training as a way to work on myself and perhaps one day work with clients. And I had during the training sort of, as they say, aha moment after aha moment. When you finally feel seen and heard and understood, and you gain awareness, like why these repetitive cycles in my life? Why can't I seem to just get a break or just break the cycle or graduate from these repetitive patterns? It's interesting because actually my greatest suffering in life, that loneliness that I felt and financial struggles and housing, especially the housing struggles, the homelessness, is what ultimately led me to what feels like my life purpose, really helping people heal from any inherited family trauma and attachment trauma. So the awareness that I gained was, and this is a bit sort of my own life story, that the homelessness that I experienced and the financial struggles, in a sense, I was repeating my father's patterns in life because he struggled too. He was actually at a point in his life, also homeless. But it was, so what it is, what you learn actually when you study attachment trauma or inherited family trauma is that when you have a break in the attachment with your mother, typically homelessness is symptomatic of that. Actually, mother is sort of the template for life. I wasn't exactly born into the best of circumstances. So my father, he lost his mother at a young age. He was a young child when he lost his mother, and he grew up in an orphanage in an underprivileged part of Turkey. About 18 years later, when he met my mother, and they married, and my mother was pregnant with me, my mother, she was only 16 years old. And not only was she 16 years old, but so they met in Turkey, but then they moved to Amsterdam. And so my mother found herself all alone in a foreign country, a foreign land, where she didn't speak the language. Without a support network. And my father, he was physically abusive with my mother while she was pregnant with me. Now, before you think of my father as a monster, of course, this traumatized me and it's caused a major break in the attachment with my mother. What it was that because he lost his mother at such a young age and he never had therapy, no one ever held his hand, for him, love was just something that he was afraid of, because love is scary, because love will leave. So his coping mechanism was to control my mother, be physically abusive with her. But so when a mother-to-be is under that much stress during pregnancy, she cannot attune to her child. And she just doesn't have the emotional bandwidth, the emotional freedom to attune to her baby. And so what happens then in utero, so mother and baby are like two tuning forks. So if mother is afraid, child is afraid, baby is afraid. And if mother cannot attune to her child, the belief that we then adopt is, I don't matter, I'm a burden, I'm unwanted. So this is then also, so what happens then when we have such a break in the bond with mother later on in life, first of all, that broken relationship with your mother, if that's not healed, you tend to actually recreate that scenario, that broken relationship with your mother, because you stop trusting her love. You stop, because it was not just that she was struggling while she was pregnant with me. Also, while she was married to my father, and this was in my early childhood, she was completely distracted by, well, her own struggles. Typically, the first memory that we have with our mother, it's emblematic of the relationship that we have with our mother. And my first memory of my mother is she was praying to God, crying, and me, I tuned to her. Like, my way of bonding with her was to take care of her, making sure that she was okay. And we do this out of a survival mechanism, to maintain some bond with her mother. When we have that kind of break in the attachment with our mother, that typically shows up later on in life in our relationships and our circumstances in a couple of ways. First of all, maybe we stop trusting, we no longer trust our mother's love. So we also do not trust our partners, our co-workers, we don't trust other people. Another way in which breaking the bond with our mother affects us or shapes us is that we become sort of good. We become, a good girl. We become quiet. We become efficient. We become whatever we need to be in order to, please other people, the way we had to sort of be around our mother. But this is not really our authentic self, actually. And another way also in which this break in the bond shows up later in life is we tend to, at some point, typically this can be in our 30s or usually towards our 40s, we develop some sort of an illness or circumstances that forces us to become dependent on others. Essentially everyone in our environment, be it our doctors, be it our friends, be it our partners, they will have to take care of us. Why? Because we're still looking for the love, the attunement that we never received from our mother. So unconsciously, we do this unconsciously, of course, we develop some sort of a disease, or there are some sort of circumstances, that things go awry, and we find ourselves either having to move back home back home with our mother, so that our mother can now take care of us, or we become dependent on, well, our doctors, therapists, friends, partners, etc., so that we can receive unconsciously, we can receive that attunement, that love. So gaining this awareness was a major breakthrough for me. And yeah, so I now work with clients actually to help them actually become aware of this, how their relationship with their mother, but also inherited family trauma, how it's shaping their or influencing their circumstances.
That all makes a lot of sense. I had never really thought about it that way. And thinking back in my mind, I just think about, you know, people I know or clients that I've worked with that have been going through that, and I didn't know that. That's really interesting. You know, if someone was to reach out to you, what does that look like? What does a session look like, if you're okay sharing?
Yes, yes, yes. So first, well, usually they have an issue. Most people I work with, typically, it's either depression, anxiety, financial struggles, relationship struggles. It tends to be in this area. So what we typically do is that during the first half of the session, the first half of the session is more diagnosis. So we look at, okay, does this difficulty that the client is experiencing, is that caused by some unresolved early childhood trauma? And we always first look at the relationship with the mother. And this is not to, because some clients ask me, okay, what about the father? The father is important too, but the father's role is somewhat more tertiary. So it's somewhat more in the background, actually. Oftentimes trauma, as you know, I mean, as hypnotherapist yourself, it happens so early that we don't have a cognitive memory. And doing this work, generational trauma and attachment trauma, I mean, for myself, I had to really ask my mother questions. What happened while you were pregnant with me? What happened during those first couple of years? And most of the time, like our parents, they don't like talking about the past. What it is that not talking about the past is what actually creates, it's actually a fertile ground for repetition. So that's the difficulty. It's when it's unspoken, when it remains a secret, or sort of pushed under the rug, that's actually when it becomes fertile ground for repetition. But so during the session, we go, first what I always look at, and this is like everything I know about this form of therapy is what I know from Mark himself, from Mark Willin. So during the first half of the session, we look at, okay, sort of, how was your early childhood? And we focus on early childhood. And then we might also look at sort of generational trauma, but that usually comes second. First, always sort of childhood, early childhood. And so the first half is sort of diagnosis, and then the second half is more somatic body work. We look at, because this is what healing ultimately requires, we need to talk, we need to gain that awareness as to why we're experiencing a certain struggle, and what lies at its root. But then once we have that awareness, we need to look, locate and soothe where the trauma lives in the body, the fight, flight, freeze response. So we do somatic exercises, visualization exercises to calm down the amygdala, to regulate the nervous system.
That sounds wonderful. It sounds very gentle.
Yeah.
Like a gentle process of doing it, right?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Many people, what I notice is that it's, they don't know. I mean, they have no idea. They know, I mean, they know they're struggling, obviously, but they have no idea actually that it's caused by like some issue, some unresolved trauma in the past. They have no idea. Often they have no idea it's because of their broken relationship, the break in the attachment with their caregiver, with their mother. They have no idea actually that's where they need to look, and that's where it's on that. So that they need to do some work.
So if I was listening to this right now, as a viewer, what kind of symptoms would I might be struggling with, let's say, that would make me go, oh, maybe it's that, and maybe I should contact Oslam.
Financial struggles are typically system relationship struggles, push-pull dynamics in relationships, the absence of a relationship, repetitive patterns, struggles really in any area of life can typically sort of be symptomatic of a break in the attachment. in early childhood or inherited family trauma. We inherit, sort of through epigenetics, we inherit our parents' fight, flight, freeze responses. We can be unconsciously identified or merged with someone else in the family system. This could show up really in our finances, in our relationships with other people, when we don't trust our partner, we don't trust others. We find ourselves in repetitive patterns with other men or women, never being able to get out of financial difficulty. Those are typically sort of symptoms of a break in the attachment or inherited family trauma.
How many sessions would this take to go through?
So normally a session lasts 2 hours. So the first hour is diagnostics or diagnosis, and then the second hour is somatic therapy. Depends really on what the client is struggling with, but that already helps us sort of solve a piece of the puzzle. I give the client always some homework. So in this kind of therapy, I always give the client some homework, some somatic exercises really to downregulate the amygdala, to self-regulate the nervous system. We have sort of a second or third session. It's not a kind of therapy where you really have to meet every week for 6 months or a year. It's not that kind of therapy. Usually 3, 4 sessions, 5 sessions is enough to deal with one issue.
Do you mind explaining what somatic therapy is?
Yes. Essentially what healing requires is to locate and soothe and integrate the fight, flight, freeze responses that we either inherited from our father or mother or because of early childhood trauma. And there are different exercises that we do, visualizations and different practices. You can tell the client feels tight. It's usually sort of in solar plexus. It's there where they feel tight or they start yawning. Yes, yawning. I think in your practice that might happen a lot too, sort of yawning. And but it's usually sort of a tightness they feel in the solar plexus. That's what's most often. It can also be in the shoulders and neck, difficulty breathing, really. That's also typically a sign of sort of attachment trauma. Somatic therapies are essentially a way of integrating. First of all, soothing, locating, and integrating really the fight, flight, freeze responses that are sort of stored in the body, that live on in the body.
So does that mean you're moving? What in the session are you giving them movements? Or are you getting them to tap into themselves? What happens?
We work more with visualization a lot, and then really we see what comes up in the body. Typically tightness in the solar plexus, yawning again, tears, crying. So it's really, visualization exercises. So it's not, it's often on Zoom, but even if it wasn't on Zoom, because most of my clients tend to be in other countries, but even if it wasn't on Zoom, it's not the kind of therapy where I would actually have to touch someone, but it's more with visualization exercises that we locate and soothe.
I've got a question about clients that don't feel themselves to be visual people. Internally visual, imagination, that kind of stuff. What would you do in that instance?
So if a client cannot really visualize, when we do a visualization exercise, instead of the word visualizing or seeing, the word that I use is feeling. So when we do an exercise, for example, with the mother, feel your mother walk closer, feel your mother step away, instead of seeing. Something that Mark always says, which I find really brilliant, is that what he says is the way he sees it is the first half of our life, our authentic self is masked by career drives, hormonal drives to make money, to have a family, etc. But then usually there comes a point, usually towards our 40s, but this could already be in our 30s, that life falls apart and we enter into a dark night of the soul. And why is this? Is that because they haven't integrated those fight, flight, freeze responses from the trauma that I experienced in early childhood. So it's at this point in life that actually we become authentic. Because what does the dark night of the soul do? It forces us to become vulnerable, to surrender. Often suffering is so great that no one can help us, no doctor, no family member, relative, friend, no therapist. So it brings us to our knees and eventually forces us to soften and become vulnerable and surrendered and compassionate to others and ourselves. And basically we become more human. So maybe this is interesting to mention, sort of this age of 40. I mean, also apparently, so Mark, he doesn't really work with clients usually. I mean, not necessarily, but under the age of 40, because we're not yet our authentic self. But also apparently, Carl Jung wouldn't work with any clients under the age of 40 for the exact same reason. So,
That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
mm,
I didn't know that about Carl Jung. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I know mine hit when I was 35, and now I'm 40, and um, definitely feeling integrated,
yeah,
right? Authentic. I think there's more authenticity that I could have.
yeah, yeah.
But I think we're constantly growing. We want to be, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think also like in the past I would have been, especially in my 20s, really reluctant to, talk about, I don't know, my mother being pregnant with me at 16 or so, because like in the environment I grew up or went to university, like I went to school where I was surrounded by princesses, literally, so my childhood was something that I hid, sort of
Yeah. Was
yeah.
there shame? Forgive
Yeah,
me for asking, but was there shame that you felt around
yeah,
that?
I felt like my life wasn't normal. Like my background
Mm.
wasn't normal. But now I realize, like, hey, no, I mean, we're all traumatized in one way or another, and we speak much more
Yeah.
openly about it, too, at this point. So,
Do you have anything that you want to say to the viewers, um, to that's helpful, or just something that you've learned along the way that you just want to share?
just say this. So if you're struggling, if you're struggling, especially if you have these repetitive patterns, like financial struggles that despite, whatever you do, you don't seem to be able to just get out of, just finally end those repetitive cycles, and the same dynamics in relationships. It is most likely, again, there's something that needs to be healed there. So if you are watching this and you are in your 30s, 40s, and you are going through dark night of the soul, such struggles as I experience, know that it's part of a brilliant plan.
That's beautiful. I like that those words. I wish when I was going through mine that I would have heard those words. 'Cause yeah, at 35, mine just whoop, the door closed and
Yeah.
I had that. But now at 40, I feel a lot better. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's amazing. If people want to reach out to you, what's the easiest way to reach out to you?
Yes. So my website it's a Turkish name, so it's özlematasever.com. I offer a 30-minute sort of complimentary sort of consultation session just to see if I can really help someone. I'm also on social media, on Instagram, on YouTube too.
Yeah, all those links will be below this show if you want to check Oslam out and sign up for that free consultation. That sounds amazing. Just to see if this is right for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Oslam, for meeting with me today and talking about your story and where you're at now and how you're helping people.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Hilary.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
you're
Yeah.
very welcome.
Always so nice talking to you.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah.